So I want to tell you something that I've never said on camera before. So there was a period in my life where I was training harder than I ever had. Early mornings, long sessions, swimming, rowing, sprinting, lifting back to back, week after week. And I was exhausted. Not the kind of exhausted where you finish a session and feel tired but satisfied. This was a very different kind of tired, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep, and the kind that was there, always there when I woke up. And the thing that was really messing with my head was that none of my lifts were improving. My sprint times were flat, and the weights just weren't moving in the same fluid way that they should have been. And it felt like no matter how hard I tried, how much effort I was putting into training, I was very much standing still. Nothing was getting better. In fact, my overall performance was actually getting worse. And I was putting more in than I ever had and getting less back. So I did what most people would do. And I told myself I just needed to push through it. I needed to train harder, be more consistent, want it more. And so I did, and things got worse. And it took me longer than I'd like to admit to fully realize what was actually happening, particularly because I actually loved my training program. I loved being an athlete and I loved the multi-sports that I was doing, but my body wasn't failing me. My body was communicating with me, and I just wasn't listening until one day I fell off the rower in a heap, completely spent. So what I had ignored at the time was that after 40, the same inputs don't produce the same results. The training that built me in my 20s, in my 30s, was actually breaking me down in my 40s. Not because I was weaker, but because the rules had changed and I was still playing by the old rules. So here's what makes this important. My story isn't unusual. Research has already shown that physical and mental exhaustion are among the top symptoms that negatively affect training and performance in perimenopausal women. So most of them are doing exactly what I did, pushing harder, wondering why it's not working, and then going on to blame themselves. So today I want to talk about something that almost nobody in the fitness space actually says clearly enough. Some of the habits that we've been told are healthy, that habits that we are proud of, the ones that make us feel like proof of our discipline and our dedication, some of those habits can actually be working directly against us after 40. Not because we're doing them wrong, but because our bodies have changed. And some of what used to be medicine has quietly now become stressed. Hi, I'm Adelaide B. I'm a certified personal trainer with a degree in exercise and sports science and a master's in psychology. And I'm going to start where my story began: too much training. Now, before I get into this, I want you to know that this topic is so important and there's so much to cover that I've actually split it into two videos. So today I'm going to talk about the physical habits, the ones happening in the gym, in the kitchen, in the early mornings, and exactly what they're doing inside a perimenopausal body. Next Sunday, I'm going to go somewhere deeper. I'm going to talk about the psychology behind why we develop these habits in the first place, why we push so hard, and why understanding that can change everything. Both videos work as standalone videos, but together they'll tell the full picture. So if this one resonates with you, do come back next week Sunday. I think that one might be the most important thing I've said on this channel so far. So right, let's get into it. Overtraining, where more becomes the enemy. So I want to be really careful here because there is a difference between training hard and overtraining. So training hard is necessary. Progressive challenge is necessary, and it's how our bodies adapt and get stronger. But overtraining is something completely different. So overtraining is when the stress that you're putting on your body consistently outpaces your ability to recover from it. And in perimenopause, that tipping point arrives much sooner than it used to be. And here's why. Training is stressful on the body, and it's something that I say to all of my clients. When you train hard, your body releases cortisol, which is your primary stress hormone. And in healthy doses, cortisol is fine, and it's part of how exercise creates that adaptation. But the problem in midlife is, as your estrogen levels decline, cortisol tends to rise anyway. So now your body's natural cortisol buffer, which estrogen provided, weakens. So the same training session that once created a manageable stress spike is now creating a much bigger one. And if you're not recovering fully between sessions, which takes longer after 40, that cortisol level never really fully comes back down. So chronically elevated cortisol in a perimenopausal body does three things that work directly against everything you're training for. One, it breaks down muscle tissue. Two, it promotes fat storage, especially around the abdomen. And three, it disrupts your sleep, which is when muscle repair and hormonal recovery actually happen. So the more you overtrain, the more muscle you lose, the more fat you store around the middle, and the worse you sleep, which means you're not recovering, which means that the next training session causes even more damage, even more stress. And this is what I was living. And at the time, it was really hard to stop, particularly as I said before, I really loved my training and it was my happy place and all my friends were there. But the signs of overtraining aren't always obvious. And it's not always an injury. Often it's so much subtler than that. Sometimes you can finish workouts feeling completely drained rather than energized. Your performance plateaus or drops. You get sick more often. Sleep becomes lighter and it can become more broken. And there's that low level flatness physically and mentally that just won't shift. And if any of those sound familiar, it's because your body is asking for something completely different. The 5 a.m. problem, sacrificing sleep to exercise. So let's talk about the lack of sleep a bit more, because it's one of the most well-intended, most damaging patterns in women over 40. The alarm goes off. Everyone else is asleep. The house is quiet. This is the only time that belongs to you. So you get up, you do the work, you get it done before the day takes over, and you feel proud of yourself for that. And you should, because the commitment is real and the intention behind it is genuinely good. But here's what's happening physiologically when you consistently cut sleep short to exercise. Sleep is not passive recovery. And I will say that again. Sleep is not passive recovery. It is the primary window of time during which your body repairs your muscle tissue, regulates your hormones, and consolidates memory and resets your entire stress response system. So when you cut that window short, even by 60 to 90 minutes, your cortisol is elevated when you wake up. Your body is already in a stress state before you've even picked up a weight or got on a rowing machine. And then you add a training session on top of that elevated cortisol level. And in a perimenopausal body where the estrogen buffer is already declining, it's that combination that has a significant physiological stressor on the body. So you're essentially training in a body that hasn't recovered and then spending the rest of the day running on caffeine and adrenaline to compensate. And over time, that cycle of behavior keeps cortisol levels chronically elevated, which, as I've just said, it drives the belly fat accumulation, especially around the middle. It drives muscle loss and it drives exhaustion that most women are desperately trying to reverse. So the hard truth is this. A 45-minute strength session on 7 to 8 hours of sleep will do significantly more for your body composition, your hormones, and your long-term health than that same session on 5 hours of sleep. So sleep is not what you sacrifice to make time for health. Sleep is literally your health. Intermittent fasting, when it starts working against you. So let's move on to intermittent fasting, and I want to say this up front. Intermittent fasting is not inherently bad. For some people in certain situations, it works and it works really well. But the research on how it affects women, particularly women in perimenopause, tells a much more complicated story than most fasting content actually tells you. And I think you deserve to hear it. So here's the mechanism. Women's bodies are significantly more sensitive to energy restriction than men's. And a big part of that comes down to a neuropeptide called kisspeptin, which plays a central role in regulating sex hormones, appetite, your glucose levels, and your body composition. And it's more sensitive in women than in men. So when you fast, when your body senses an energy deficit, kisspeptin is disrupted, and when kisspeptin is disrupted, the hormonal cascade that depends on it becomes less stable. So in perimenopause, where hormone stability is already compromised, that disruption can amplify symptoms rather than improve them. And then there's also the cortisol piece. So Dr. Stacey Sims, one of the leading researchers in female exercise physiology, has also consistently talked about how fasting triggers a cortisol stress response that is more pronounced in women than men, particularly when combined with other stressors, like I've said, poor sleep, calorie restriction, or high intensity training. And in midlife, most women are dealing with all three of these at once. So what can happen when a perimenopausal woman fasts aggressively? Your cortisol levels spike in the morning fasting window. Blood sugar becomes less stable, not more. Muscle protein breakdown increases. Your energy crashes worsen and your cravings intensify. And the belly fat, which was the original motivation to fast, can actually increase rather than reduce. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because the tool wasn't designed for your biology. And fasting isn't the only habit that can backfire. The one I'm about to talk about is the one that most women are the most proud of, and it might be causing you more damage. Extreme calorie restriction. Eating less might be making it worse. So I touched on this in my previous video, why getting strong is the fastest way to get lean. You can have a look at it up here, but I want to go deeper here because it connects directly to what I've just been talking about. So when women notice their bodies changing in midlife, the belly, the energy levels, the weight gain, the instinct is almost always to eat less. And it makes logical sense. Calories in, calories out, eat less, weigh less. But in a perimenopausal body, aggressive calorie restriction can set off a whole chain reaction that makes the problem far worse, not better. So low calorie intake is a survival signal. Your body will read that as a threat and as famine. So in response, guess what rises? Your cortisol levels. Your metabolism slows down and the body becomes more protective of its fat stores, particularly the visceral fat around the middle, which treats it as an emergency fuel reserve. And muscle, which is, as I've said in my previous videos, metabolically expensive to maintain, starts to break down because the body is trying to conserve energy any way that it can. So you eat less, you lose muscle, your metabolism slows down, and your body needs fewer and fewer calories. So you have to restrict more and more and more to see any changes, and the cycle gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's also worth addressing for anyone who is currently using or considering using a GLP-1 medication. These medications can support weight loss, but research consistently shows that a significant proportion of that weight loss can come from muscle mass, not just fat. So in a perimenopausal body that is already losing muscle, that in itself is a very serious concern. So strength training and adequate protein intake alongside these medications is absolutely essential, and it's something I'll be dedicating a full video to later on. But whether you're using medication or not, the principle is still the same. As I said in my previous videos, eat enough to protect your muscle to protect your metabolism. So more restriction is not the answer, but smarter fueling is. So overtraining, sleep deprivation, aggressive fasting, and extreme restriction. 4 habits that look like discipline from the outside, but 4 habits that a perimenopausal body might experience as stress. And stress, as we know, is the very thing driving the belly fat, the exhaustion that stalled results that motivated those habits in the first place. Sometimes when you push harder with the wrong tools, the more your body actually can dig in. It's not failure, it's basic physiology. But here's what I want you to sit with before next Sunday and the next video comes out. Those habits didn't come from nowhere. Most women aren't overtraining because they love to suffer. They're not restricting eating because they enjoy hunger. And they're certainly not getting up at 5 a.m. because they have nothing better to do. They're doing it because something underneath is driving them. And that something is what I'm going to be talking about next week in the next video. Why do we push so hard? And what are we really trying to fix? And why the approach most of us have been taking is working against the very body we're trying to take care of. So next Sunday, same time, same place. And if this video landed for you, share it with someone that you know. There's probably a woman in your life doing all of these things right now and wondering why she's so exhausted. She needs to hear this too. So I'll see you next Sunday and have a fabulous week.